A woman running from death, a man who refuses to chase, and one clean shot that changes everything. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Lila's story travels. Hit that like button and settle in, because this tale of survival, trust, and second chances in the 1873 Texas Hill Country is just getting started. The scrub burned behind her, orange flames licking up through the mesquite and live oak like the devil's own fingers reaching for her heels. Lila Monroe ran. Her lungs screamed, her bare feet bled. The calico dress she'd worn for 3 days straight caught on thorns and tore free, leaving pieces of fabric behind like breadcrumbs she didn't want anyone to follow. The rifle crack that had shattered the twilight still echoed in her ears, mingling with the memory of Dalton's body hitting the ground, heavy, final, and somehow smaller in death than he'd ever been in life. She didn't mourn him, couldn't afford to. Behind her, voices shouted, men's voices, rough and angry, the kind that had followed her since she was 14 and learned what it meant to be noticed by the wrong sort. The kind that had led her into a marriage that wasn't a marriage at all, just a transaction scrawled on paper that gave one man the right to sell another human being like livestock. Dalton had tried. God above, he'd tried to auction her off to a rancher up near Austin, a man with dead eyes and hands that left bruises. When she'd fought, Dalton had struck her. When she'd run, he'd followed. When he'd caught her at the edge of the Pedernales River, she'd grabbed the nearest rock and made her choice. Then his partner had come, and the shots had started, and now the scrub was burning, and Lila was running, and she had no plan beyond the next breath, the next step, the next moment of not being caught. The land stretched out before her in the failing light, all rolling limestone hills and scattered cedar breaks. No towns, no neighbors, just wilderness that could hide her or kill her with equal indifference. Her vision blurred with sweat and exhaustion. She'd lost Dalton's blood money somewhere in the river, $40 that might have bought her a stage ticket to nowhere. And now all she had were the clothes on her back and the desperate knowledge that if those men caught her, they'd finish what Dalton started. She crested a rise and nearly fell, catching herself against a twisted juniper. Her palm came away sticky with sap and blood. In the distance, maybe a quarter mile down the slope, a single light flickered. A lamp, a building, a chance. Lila didn't let herself think. Thinking led to hesitation, and hesitation led to capture. She pushed off from the tree and half ran, half stumbled down the rocky hillside, her feet finding purchase in the gathering dark through sheer, stubborn will. Behind her, the flames spread, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Ahead, the light grew steadier. A ranch house, low-slung, built from limestone and cedar, with a wide porch and corrals stretching out to one side. Chickens scratched in a wire pen. A dog barked once, sharp and questioning. The air smelled of wood smoke and horses and something cooking, beans maybe, or stew, and the sheer normalcy of it made Lila's throat close up with something she refused to name. She reached the porch steps and collapsed against the railing, gasping. Her hands shook. Her dress clung to her back, soaked through with sweat and fear. For 3 heartbeats she couldn't move, could only stand there gulping air while her body threatened to give out entirely. Then the door opened. The man who stood in the doorway was tall, lean, and weathered in the way of men who'd spent their lives under the Texas sun. 40, maybe, or younger, but aged by wind and work. Dark hair shot through with gray, dark eyes that studied her without flinching, and a stillness about him that made Lila think of deep water, calm on the surface, dangerous underneath. He wore a plain cotton shirt rolled to his elbows, canvas trousers, and no gun that she could see. He didn't speak, just looked at her, taking in the torn dress, the bleeding feet, the wild desperation that must have been written all over her face. His gaze moved past her, toward the orange glow spreading across the hills. "That your fire?" His voice was low, measured, carrying the slight drawl of a man who'd been born to this country and never left. Lila swallowed hard. Her voice came out raw, barely above a whisper. "No, but the men who said it are looking for me." He absorbed that without reaction, didn't step back, didn't reach for a weapon, didn't slam the door in her face. Just stood there, one hand resting on the doorframe, considering. "How many men?" "2, maybe 3. She couldn't be sure. After Dalton fell, everything had become chaos. They have guns. Most men do out here. He paused. They have cause to kill you, or just cause to want you back? The question cut through her panic like a knife. Lila met his eyes, forcing herself to hold steady. The man I was married to is dead. I killed him. His partners want me for it. Another man might have recoiled, might have cursed or prayed or thrown her off his land. This one just nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. Not judgment, but a kind of grim understanding that said he'd seen his share of desperate people making desperate choices. That marriage legal? On paper. The words tasted like ash. Not in any way that matters. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Then he stepped back from the door, widening the opening. Come inside. We'll sort the rest after you catch your breath. Lila's legs nearly gave out. She'd expected refusal or demands or the cold calculation of a man weighing her worth against his trouble. She hadn't expected simple, uncomplicated shelter. She climbed the steps on shaking legs, and when she crossed the threshold into the lamplight, the warmth hit her like a physical thing. The interior was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a pot hanging over low coals. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. Shelves held supplies, coffee, beans, flour, a few books. A doorway in the back led to what might have been a bedroom. Everything had the worn-in quality of long use and careful maintenance. The man closed the door behind her and shot the bolt. Name's Caleb Holt. This is my land. Lila Monroe. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how she must look, ragged, filthy, shaking. I don't have money. I can't pay you for this. Didn't ask you to. Caleb moved to the fireplace and ladled something into a tin cup. He held it out to her and she took it automatically. Water, cold and clean. She drank half of it in one pull before she could stop herself. He watched her, then gestured to the table. Sit before you fall down. I'll see to those feet. Lila sat. It felt strange being told what to do without the weight of threat behind it. Caleb fetched a basin and a cloth, filled the basin with water from a bucket by the door, and knelt in front of her without ceremony. When he reached for her ankle, she flinched. He stopped. Didn't try again, didn't push, just waited, patient as stone. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly, but those cuts need cleaning or they'll fester. Lila's jaw tightened. She forced herself to nod, to uncurl her hands from the edge of the chair. Caleb lifted her foot carefully, his touch impersonal and steady, and began cleaning the worst of the damage. The water stung. She bit down on the inside of her cheek and didn't make a sound. You run all the way from the river? Most of it. That's 6 miles over rough country. He worked methodically, rinsing the cloth and wringing it out. You're tougher than you look. Had to be. He glanced up at her, and something in his eyes said he understood that too. He finished with the first foot, set it down gently, and started on the second. The silence stretched out, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant muffled barking of the dog outside. Those men, Lila said finally, her voice steadier now. They'll come looking. Maybe. Caleb didn't sound particularly concerned. This is a big country, lots of places to hide a person who doesn't want to be found. You don't know them. Don't need to. He set the cloth aside and reached for a small tin on the shelf, some kind of salve that smelled of pine tar and something sharper. He dabbed it on the worst of her cuts, his movements efficient and sure. I know men like them, know what they want and what they'll do to get it. Know that most of them are cowards at heart, and cowards don't fight fair when the odds turn against them. Lila studied him, this stranger who'd taken her in without question or hesitation. Why are you helping me? Caleb finished wrapping her feet in clean strips of cloth and sat back on his heels. His gaze met hers, level and unflinching. Because you needed it. Because you asked. Because I've got room and you don't have anywhere else to go. He stood, brushing off his hands. That answer enough for you? It wasn't, but Lila found herself nodding anyway. Caleb moved back to the fireplace, stirred the pot, and ladled stew into a bowl. He set it in front of her with a spoon and a hunk of cornbread. Eat. Then we'll figure out what comes next. She ate. The stew was simple, beans, venison, onions, but it was hot and filling and the first real food she'd had in 2 days. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Caleb poured himself coffee and leaned against the doorframe, staring out into the dark through a gap in the shutters. "They're not coming tonight," he said after a while. "Fire's got them occupied and they won't track in the dark. Morning, though, that's when they'll start looking." Lila's stomach nodded. "I should leave. Before then." "And go where?" Caleb turned to face her. "You're on foot, no money, no supplies. You make it 10 miles before you collapse, and then what? They find you anyway, only this time you're alone in the brush with no one to vouch for you." "Why would you vouch for me?" The words came out harsher than she meant them to. "You don't know me. Don't know what I've done." "Know enough." He set his coffee down and crossed his arms. "Know you're running scared from men who mean you harm. Know you killed a man who had it coming. Know you've got more grit than sense, which is why you're still breathing." He paused. "And I know what it's like to need a place to stand when the ground's falling out from under you." The last words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lila studied his face, the hard lines around his mouth, the faint scars on his knuckles, the way his eyes seemed older than the rest of him. This was a man who'd seen his share of trouble, maybe caused some of it, maybe survived it by the skin of his teeth. "I don't want charity," she said quietly. "Didn't offer it. I'm offering shelter and the choice to take it or leave it. But if you stay, you pull your weight, work the land, tend the animals, help with the harvest. You earn your keep, same as anyone." He met her gaze. "That sound fair to you?" It sounded impossible. It sounded like a trap. It sounded like the first honest offer anyone had made her since she was 12 years old and her mother died and left her to fend for herself in a world that didn't care whether she lived or starved. "For how long?" Caleb shrugged. "Long as you need, long as you want, or until you decide to move on. I'm not your keeper, Lila. I'm just a man with land and a house and no particular use for either one if I'm the only one here." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But trust was a luxury she'd lost the right to years ago, and every instinct she had screamed that this was too easy, too good, too simple to be real. "I'll stay tonight," she said finally, "and we'll see about the rest in the morning." Caleb nodded. "Fair enough." He gestured to the back room. "Bedroom's through there. You can take the bed. I'll sleep out here." Lila blinked. "You don't have to do that." "Didn't say I had to. Said I would." He picked up his coffee and moved to the chair by the fire. "You've been running all day. You need rest more than I do." "I can take the floor. You'll take the bed, or you'll take the porch." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Only 2 places to sleep in this house, and I'm not letting a woman with torn-up feet sleep on hard ground when there's a perfectly good mattress going to waste." Lila opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. There was no winning this, and truthfully, she was too exhausted to try. She stood slowly, testing her weight on her bandaged feet. They hurt, but they held. She looked at Caleb, this stranger who'd shown her more kindness in 1 hour than she'd known in 5 years, and felt something crack open in her chest, something dangerous and terrifying and achingly fragile. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Caleb just nodded, his eyes on the fire. "Get some sleep. Morning comes early out here." She left him there and slipped into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. The room was simple: a bed with a quilt, a washstand, a window with shutters drawn tight. She sank onto the mattress and pulled the quilt over herself, still fully dressed, and stared up at the dark ceiling. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of smoke and cedar. Lila closed her eyes and listened to the creak of the house settling, the low murmur of Caleb moving about in the main room, the distant call of a nighthawk. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something that might have been safety. She didn't trust it, but she let herself rest in it anyway, just for tonight. And when sleep finally claimed her, it was deep and dreamless and unbroken by fear. Morning came with pale light filtering through the gaps in the shutters and the smell of coffee drifting through the house. Lila woke all at once, heart pounding, instinct screaming at her to run before whatever trap she'd walked into snapped shut. Then memory returned. Caleb, the ranch, the offer of shelter, and she forced herself to breathe slowly, to let the panic ebb. She sat up carefully, testing her feet. They ached, but the sharpest pain had dulled to a manageable throb. The salve had done its work. She stood, grimacing at the stiffness in her legs, and moved to the washstand. Someone, Caleb must have been, had left a clean shirt and a pair of canvas trousers folded on the chair. Men's clothes, worn but mended. A silent offer. Lila hesitated only a moment before stripping off the ruined calico and pulling on the shirt and trousers. They were too large, but not impossibly so. She rolled the cuffs, cinched the waist with a length of rope she found coiled on the floor, and caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked like a scarecrow. Hair wild and tangled, face smudged with dirt and smoke, eyes too large and a face gone hollow with hunger and fear. But dressed like this, she also looked like something else. Like someone who could work, who could move, who didn't have to worry about skirts catching on fences or propriety dictating where she could or couldn't go. She braided her hair quickly and stepped out into the main room. Caleb stood at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. He glanced up when she entered, his gaze flicking over her new attire without comment. "Coffee's on the table. Eggs'll be done in a minute." Lila poured herself a cup and wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "Thank you for the clothes." Had them lying around. "Figured they'd fit you better than what you came in wearing." He slid eggs onto 2 plates, added biscuits from a covered basket, and set 1 plate in front of her. "How are the feet? Better?" She sat, eyeing the food. Her stomach growled audibly. "You always feed strangers this well?" "Don't get many strangers out here." Caleb took the chair across from her and picked up his fork. "Eat before it gets cold." They ate in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable so much as deliberate. Outside, the dog barked again, followed by the whinny of horses in the corral. The day was warming up, sunlight streaming through the gaps in the shutters and painting stripes of gold across the rough plank floor. When they'd both finished, Caleb pushed his plate aside and leaned back in his chair. "Need to check the fence line today. Fire came close to the east pasture last night. Didn't jump the creek, but I want to be sure. You're welcome to come along, or you can stay here and rest." Lila met his eyes. "I'll come." He nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "We leave in 10 minutes. There's a hat hanging by the door. Sun's mean this time of year." She helped him clear the dishes, moving carefully on her tender feet, and followed him outside. The morning air was cool and clean, scented with sage and juniper. The ranch spread out before her, corrals, a barn, a chicken coop, all built solid and maintained with care. Beyond, the hills rolled away in shades of green and gold, dotted with scrub oak and limestone outcrops. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, the kind of beauty that didn't apologize for its rough edges. Caleb saddled 2 horses, a bay gelding for himself and a smaller gray mare for Lila. He adjusted the stirrups without asking, held the mare steady while Lila pulled herself into the saddle and swung up onto the bay with the easy grace of a man who'd been riding since before he could walk. They rode out in silence, following a narrow trail that wound through the cedar breaks and up into the hills. The fire's path was visible in the distance, blackened earth, skeletal trees, the acrid smell of char still hanging in the air. But the flames had stopped at the creek, just as Caleb said, contained by water and luck and the shifting wind. Lila watched him as they rode. He moved with the horse like they were one creature, his attention focused outward, constantly scanning the landscape. He didn't talk, didn't try to fill the silence with empty words, just rode, steady and sure, and let her keep pace beside him. They reached the fence line an hour later. Caleb dismounted and walked the length of it, checking posts and wire, tightening where it had gone slack. Lila slid down from the mare and followed, watching the way he worked. Methodical, thorough, wasting no motion. When he found a post that needed replacing, he pulled tools from his saddlebag and set to work without complaint. "Hand me that wire," he said after a moment. And Lila did, falling into an easy rhythm of passing him what he needed before he asked. They worked together in silence, the sun climbing higher, sweat dampening their shirts. It felt good, this simple work. Purposeful. Real. When they finished, Caleb straightened and surveyed the repaired fence with satisfaction. "That'll hold." He glanced at Lila, something shifting in his expression. "You're handy." "Had to be." She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. No one else was going to do it for me. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Reckon that's true for most of us. They rode back in companionable quiet, reaching the ranch as the sun hit its zenith. Caleb unsaddled the horses and turned them out into the corral, then drew water from the well and poured it into the trough. Lila helped without being asked, her body settling into the rhythm of work, her mind finally quiet. It wasn't until they were back inside, washing up before lunch, that Caleb spoke again. "Those men you're running from, they know your name?" Lila's hand stilled in the basin. "They know what Dalton called me. Don't know if that's the same thing." "It's not." Caleb dried his hands on a towel. "Out here, you're who you say you are. Name, past, all of it. Yours to claim or discard as you see fit." He paused. "You want to stay? You stay as Lila Monroe. Anyone asks, you're my hired hand. That's all they need to know." The simplicity of it stole her breath. No questions about where she'd been or what she'd done. No demands for explanations or confessions, just an offer of anonymity and the dignity of honest work. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Why would you risk that for me? Caleb leaned against the doorframe, his gaze distant. Had someone do the same for me once. Long time ago, when I needed it. Figure it's my turn to return the favor, even if it's not to the same person. Lila wanted to ask more. Wanted to know what had driven him to this isolated stretch of Texas, what ghosts he was running from or toward. But the set of his shoulders told her the conversation was over. Some stories couldn't be pried loose. They had to be offered. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "For now. And I'll work. I won't be a burden." "Didn't think you would be." Caleb pushed off from the doorframe and moved toward the stove. "Now let's eat. Afternoon's short, and there's plenty left to do." They fell into a routine after that, one born of necessity and sustained by mutual respect. Caleb taught her the land, where the water ran sweet, where the coyotes denned, which plants could heal and which could kill. He showed her how to mend tack, how to doctor a horse's split hoof, how to read the sky for rain and the ground for tracks. He never talked down to her, never assumed she couldn't handle the work, just showed her once and expected her to remember. Lila proved him right. She learned fast, worked hard, and asked questions only when she truly didn't know. The ranch began to shift under her hands, small changes at first, like the chicken coop she repaired and the garden she coaxed back to life. Then larger ones, like the new corral posts she helped set and the barn loft she cleared of old hay and debris. Days bled into weeks. The fire's scar on the land began to green over with new growth. Lila's feet healed, the cuts fading to pale lines. Her hands grew calloused, her skin bronzed by the sun, her body strong in ways it had never been when propriety demanded she stay soft and decorative. And through it all, Caleb kept his distance, not coldly, not cruelly, but deliberately. He never stood too close, never touched her without cause, never let his gaze linger. At night, he slept on the floor by the fire while she took the bed, and in the mornings, he was always up before her, coffee made, breakfast started. He gave her space to breathe, to think, to decide what she wanted without the weight of expectation pressing down on her. It was the strangest gift anyone had ever given her. One evening, after they'd finished supper and were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Lila finally broke the silence. "You planning to ask me anything about before?" Caleb whittled a piece of cedar, shavings curling away from his knife. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know." "Most men would push." "I'm not most men." He studied the half-formed shape in his hands. "Your past is yours, Lila. What matters to me is whether you're safe now and whether you plan to stay. Rest of it's none of my business unless you make it so." Lila pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The air smelled of dust and sage, and the faint sweetness of cedar smoke. "Dalton bought me. Not officially, but near enough. My father owed money, and Dalton paid it off. Said I was his now, legal and binding, and I believed him because I didn't know any better." She paused, the words coming harder. "He promised me a home. What he gave me was a cage." Caleb's knife stilled. He didn't look at her, but she felt the weight of his attention. "When he tried to sell me to another man, I fought. When he hit me, I hit back. And when he cornered me by the river," she stopped, swallowing hard. "I didn't mean to kill him. I just meant to get away. Killing a man who's trying to hurt you isn't murder, Caleb said quietly. It's survival. The law might not see it that way. The law's a long way from here, and if those men come looking, they'll have to go through me first. He set the knife down and finally met her gaze. I meant what I said, Lila. You're safe here, long as you want to be. The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and solid. Lila blinked hard, fighting the sting in her eyes, and nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just stay alive and keep pulling your weight. That's payment enough. They sat together as the stars came out, the night air cooling, the land settling into darkness around them. And for the first time since she could remember, Lila felt something like peace. But peace, she'd learned, was never guaranteed. And trouble had a way of finding her no matter how far she ran. The morning Lila woke to find Caleb gone, she knew something had shifted. His bedroll lay neatly folded by the cold fireplace, coffee sat ready in the pot, but the house felt emptier than usual. She pulled on her boots, new ones Caleb had traded for in town 2 weeks prior, and stepped onto the porch. The bay gelding was missing from the corral. Lila's chest tightened. In the 6 weeks she'd been here, Caleb had never left without telling her first. Not because he owed her an explanation, but because that was the kind of man he was. Steady, predictable, present. His absence felt wrong, like the air before a storm. She fed the chickens, mucked the stalls, checked the fence line nearest the house. All the while her gaze kept drifting to the horizon, searching for the familiar shape of horse and rider. The sun climbed higher, the heat settled in, thick and oppressive. Still no Caleb. By noon, worry had given way to something darker. She was standing at the well, drawing water, when she heard it, the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Lila's hand went to the knife at her belt, the one Caleb had given her after she'd asked him to teach her to defend herself. Her heart hammered as she turned toward the sound, every muscle coiled tight. But it was Caleb who crested the rise, pushing the bay hard, his face grim. He reined in at the corral and swung down before the horse had fully stopped. Inside, now! Lila didn't argue. She followed him into the house, and he shut the door behind them, throwing the bolt. When he turned to face her, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Anger, sharp and cold. They're in town, he said. 2 men asking questions about a woman matching your description, saying she's wanted for murder, saying there's a reward. The bottom dropped out of Lila's stomach. How much? $200. Caleb moved to the window, peering through the shutters. Enough to make men stupid and greedy. I heard it from the blacksmith. He's trustworthy, won't talk. But there were others listening, ranch hands, drifters, men who'd sell their own mothers for half that much. Lila sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. I should leave, before they come here. And go where? Caleb's voice was sharp. You think you'll make it 10 miles before someone spots you? Towns are small out here, Lila. Word travels fast. You run now, you're just making yourself an easier target. Then what do you suggest? The words came out harsher than she meant, edged with fear and frustration. I can't stay here and wait for them to find me. I won't bring that trouble to your door. Caleb turned from the window, his jaw set. Trouble's already at my door. Has been since the night you showed up bleeding and scared. I knew what I was taking on. Question is, are you willing to fight, or are you just going to keep running? The challenge in his words stung. Lila stood, meeting his gaze. I've been fighting my whole life, but I can't fight men with guns and the law on their side. The law's not on their side, they are. Caleb crossed the room and pulled a rifle from the rack above the fireplace. He checked the chamber, then set it on the table. The man you killed, Dalton, he wasn't legally your husband. You were a minor when he took you, and even if you weren't, marriage by coercion isn't binding. Those men hunting you aren't lawmen. They're opportunists looking to collect blood money from Dalton's family. How do you know that? Asked around. He leaned against the table, arms crossed. Dalton Wade had a reputation, moved women like livestock, always one step ahead of the law. His brother's offering the reward, but the brother's got his own warrants. They won't come with a badge, Lila. They'll come with guns and lies. Lila processed this, her mind racing. So what do we do? We stand our ground. Caleb's voice was steady, certain. This is my land. Anyone comes onto it looking for trouble, they'll find it. But you need to decide right now if you're staying or going, because once this starts, there's no halfway. She looked at him, this quiet, solitary man who'd given her shelter without asking for anything in return, who'd taught her to ride and work and stand on her own 2 feet, who'd never once made her feel like she owed him more than honest labor and mutual respect. The thought of leaving, of walking away from the first real safety she'd known, felt like tearing off her own skin. "I'm staying," Caleb nodded once, satisfied. "Good. Then we prepare." The rest of that day passed in tense, focused activity. Caleb showed Lila how to load the rifle, how to aim, how to breathe through the kick. He set her up at the window with a clear line of sight to the approach, then positioned himself at the door with his own weapon. They worked in near silence, speaking only when necessary, the air between them crackling with unspoken understanding. Night fell without incident. They ate cold beans and cornbread, neither willing to risk the distraction of cooking. Caleb checked the bolts twice, extinguished all but one lamp, and settled into his usual spot by the fire. But this time, he kept the rifle across his knees. Lila lay in the bedroom, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Every sound made her flinch, the creak of the house settling, the scratch of branches against the shutters, the distant howl of a coyote. She thought about Dalton, about the weight of the rock in her hand and the way his skull had given under the blow. She thought about the men coming for her, about the price on her head, about the violence that followed her like a shadow no matter how far she ran. And she thought about Caleb, sitting guard in the next room, willing to risk everything for a woman he barely knew. The attack came 3 days later, not at night, but in the flat white heat of midday. Lila was in the garden, pulling weeds from between the squash plants, when the dog started barking. Not the friendly yip of greeting, but the low, sustained warning that meant strangers. She straightened, shading her eyes, and saw them. 2 riders approaching from the east, moving slow and deliberate. Her breath caught. She dropped the weeds and ran for the house. "Caleb!" He was already at the door, rifle in hand, his face hard. "Get inside. Stay away from the windows." "I can help." "Inside!" His voice left no room for argument. "If shooting starts, you get down and stay down. Understand?" Lila swallowed her protest and obeyed. She positioned herself behind the heavy oak table, her own rifle within reach, and watched through the gap in the shutters as Caleb stepped onto the porch. The riders drew closer, resolving into 2 men. One tall and rangy, with a scar bisecting his left cheek, the other shorter and thicker, with the flat, dead eyes of a man who'd seen too much violence to be moved by it anymore. They stopped at the edge of the yard, horses stamping and tossing their heads. "You Caleb Holt?" the scarred one called. "I am. This is private land. State your business." Looking for a woman. Lila Wade, though she might be using another name. Dark hair, slim build, about 20 years old. The man's gaze swept the ranch, calculating. "Heard she might have come this way." "Heard wrong." Caleb's voice was flat, emotionless. "No one here but me." The shorter man spat into the dust. "You sure about that? Because we got good information says she's been seen around here, and there's money in it for anyone who helps us find her." "I don't need your money." Caleb shifted slightly, and the motion drew their eyes to the rifle cradled in his arms. "And I don't appreciate strangers coming onto my land making accusations. You've got no warrant, no badge, nothing but a story. So I'll say it again, there's no one here but me. Now ride on before we have a problem." The scarred man's expression hardened. "We could search the place, just to be sure." "You could try." Caleb's tone was conversational, almost friendly, but there was steel underneath. "Be a mistake, though. I'm a light sleeper and a good shot, and I don't take kindly to trespassers. You search my property without cause, you're breaking the law. And out here, I enforce the law on my own land." For a long moment, the 3 men stared at each other, tension humming in the air like a plucked wire. Inside, Lila barely breathed, her hands slick with sweat against the rifle stock. She could see the calculation in the scarred man's eyes, weighing the reward against the risk. Caleb stood utterly still, patient as stone, and something in his stillness must have convinced them. The scarred man finally nodded, slow and deliberate. "We'll be moving on then, but if you see anything, anyone, you let us know. Name's Garrett. We'll be in town another week." "I'll keep that in mind." Caleb didn't move until they'd turned their horses and ridden back the way they'd come, disappearing over the rise. Even then, he waited, watching the horizon for long minutes before finally stepping back inside. Lila stood on shaking legs. "They'll come back." "Probably." Caleb set the rifle aside and poured water from the pitcher, drinking deeply. "But not today. Today we spooked them enough to make them think twice." "What about tomorrow? Or next week?" Her voice rose despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "They know I'm here, Caleb. They didn't believe you. They'll come back with more men, more guns. Then we'll deal with it." He set the cup down and crossed to her, his gaze steady. "Listen to me. Those men are cowards and opportunists. They want easy money, not a gunfight. As long as we make it clear there's no easy money here, they'll move on to softer targets." "You can't know that." "I know men like them. I've been men like them." The admission hung in the air between them, stark and honest. "I know what it takes to make them back down, and I know what happens when you show fear. We don't show fear. We stand our ground, and if they're stupid enough to push, we push back harder." Lila wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But trust was a luxury she'd lost the right to long ago, and every instinct screamed that this safety was temporary, that violence was coming no matter how hard they tried to avoid it. "I don't want you hurt because of me," she said quietly. Caleb's expression softened just a fraction. "I'm not a martyr, Lila. I'm not doing this out of some misguided sense of chivalry. I'm doing it because it's right, because you deserve better than to spend the rest of your life running, and because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I like having you here. This place is better with you in it, feels less like a prison and more like a home." The confession caught her off guard. In all the weeks she'd been here, Caleb had never spoken about himself, never hinted at what he wanted or needed. He'd been a wall, solid and unmoving, and now that wall had cracked just enough to let her see what lay underneath. "Why'd you come out here?" she asked. "To the middle of nowhere, all alone?" Caleb turned away, staring out the window. "Same reason you did. Needed a place to stand without someone breathing down my neck. Needed distance from who I used to be." He was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't a good man before. Did things I'm not proud of. Hurt people who didn't deserve it. When I got the chance to walk away, I took it. Bought this land with money I'd saved and swore I'd never go back to that life. What changed?" "Nothing changed. I just stopped running from it." He glanced back at her. "You can't outrun your past, Lila. Believe me, I've tried. Best you can do is build something better in front of it. Make choices that matter. Stand for something worth standing for." His words resonated deep in her chest, striking chords she hadn't known existed. Lila moved to stand beside him, looking out at the land they'd worked together, the repaired fences, the thriving garden, the sturdy corrals. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, built by their hands, sustained by their labor, defended by their will. "I don't know how to do that," she admitted. "Build something. Every time I try, it falls apart." "Then you build it again, and again, until it holds." Caleb's voice was quiet, but certain. "You're stronger than you think, Lila, stronger than you've had to be. And you're not alone anymore. You've got me, and this land, and time enough to figure out who you want to be now that no one's telling you who you have to be." The words settled over her like a benediction. Lila swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in her throat and nodded. "Okay, we stand our ground." "We stand our ground," Caleb echoed. The week that followed was tense but uneventful. They kept watch in shifts, worked the land with weapons close at hand, and slept lightly. Twice more, riders passed by on the distant trail, but none approached the ranch. Garrett and his partner were nowhere to be seen. The days grew longer, hotter, the earth baking under the relentless Texas sun. Lila fell deeper into the rhythm of the work. She learned to anticipate Caleb's needs, passing him tools before he asked, moving to the next task without prompting, reading the weather and the animals with the same instinctive understanding he had. They spoke less and communicated more, their partnership settling into something wordless and efficient. At night, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. Caleb whittled, Lila mended tack or sharpened tools, and the silence between them grew comfortable, familiar. Sometimes he told her stories about the land, where the creek ran deepest, which caves held Comanche pictographs, how the hills had looked when he'd first arrived and found them empty and waiting. Sometimes she told him about her mother, the few good memories she had before sickness took her. They never talked about the future. The present was difficult enough. One evening, as they worked side by side repairing a section of corral fence, Caleb spoke without looking at her. "You ever think about what you'd do if you could go anywhere? Be anyone?" Lila paused, hammer in hand. "Used to, when I was younger. Thought I'd go to California maybe. See the ocean. Start over where no one knew my name." She drove a nail home with 3 clean strikes. "Doesn't seem real anymore, just a story I told myself to get through the hard days. Could still do it, nothing stopping you. Except the men hunting me, and the fact that I've got no money, no family, no way to survive alone." She glanced at him. "Why? You trying to get rid of me?" "No." Caleb's answer was immediate, almost sharp. "Just wondering if this is enough for you, this life, this place." Lila set down the hammer and turned to face him fully. "It's more than I thought I'd ever have. More than I deserve, probably. So yes, Caleb, it's enough." Something shifted in his expression, relief, maybe, or gratitude. He nodded and went back to work, but his shoulders had relaxed, the tension bleeding out of him. Lila watched him for a moment longer, then returned to her own task, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. She was still thinking about that conversation 2 days later when Garrett came back. This time, he didn't come alone. This time, he brought 6 men. Lila spotted them first, her gaze catching movement on the eastern ridge. She counted riders, her blood turning to ice, then ran for the house. "Caleb, 7 men, coming fast." He was already reaching for the rifle, his face set. "Get in the bedroom, lock the door." "I'm not hiding while you are." He grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm but not rough. "They're not here to talk this time. They're here to take you by force. And if they see you, there's no bluffing our way out. So you get in that room, you lock the door, and you don't come out until I tell you it's safe. You understand me?" Lila wanted to argue, wanted to fight, but the look in Caleb's eyes told her this wasn't negotiable. She nodded once, grabbed her rifle, and retreated to the bedroom. The lock clicked behind her, and she pressed her ear to the door, heart pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. Outside, hoofbeats thundered into the yard, voices shouted, rough, aggressive, overlapping. Then Caleb's voice cut through, calm and cold. "That's close enough. We've got business here, Holt. Stand aside." No business worth having involves 7 armed men on another man's land without permission. Turn around and leave, or we're going to have a problem. The woman. We know she's here. We've got witnesses who've seen her. You hand her over, we leave peaceful. You don't, and we take her by force. "There's no woman here. I've told you that before. You're trespassing." A different voice, rougher. "We're done talking. Boys, search the house." Lila heard the scrape of boots on wood, heard Caleb's voice again, harder now. "Take one more step and I put a bullet in you." A pause. Then laughter, cruel and mocking. "You planning to shoot all 7 of us, old man?" "Don't need to shoot all of you. Just need to shoot enough to make the rest think twice about whether the reward's worth dying for." The silence that followed stretched out, taut as a bowstring. Lila gripped her rifle, sweat slicking her palms, every muscle coiled tight. Through the door, she heard the creak of leather as men shifted in their saddles, the jingle of spurs, the low murmur of voices conferring. Then a gunshot split the air. Lila's breath stopped. She lunged for the door, fingers fumbling with the lock, terror screaming through her veins. But before she could get it open, Caleb's voice rang out, steady, unshaken. "Next one goes through flesh, not dirt. Your choice." More silence. Then the sound of horses backing up, men cursing, and finally the thunder of hoofbeats retreating. Lila sagged against the door, her legs barely holding her. Minutes crawled by. Finally, a knock. "Lila, it's done. Come out." She unlocked the door with shaking hands and stumbled into the main room. Caleb stood by the window, rifle still in hand, watching the horizon. When he turned to look at her, she saw the strain in his face, the way his jaw was clenched tight. "Are you hurt?" "No." His voice was rough. "But they'll be back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But they know now that they can't take you without a fight. And men like that don't give up easy. Lila crossed to him, her own rifle forgotten. You could have been killed. Could have. He met her gaze. Wasn't, though. And neither were you. That's what matters. Caleb, we're past the point of turning back, Lila. His voice was gentle but firm. They know you're here. They know I'm protecting you. There's only two ways this ends now. They give up, or someone makes them give up permanently. The weight of his words settled over her. Lila closed her eyes, fighting the surge of guilt and fear and something else, something fierce and protective that she didn't have a name for. When she opened them again, Caleb was still watching her, waiting. Then we end it, she said quietly. However we have to. Caleb's expression shifted, something like pride flickering in his eyes. He nodded once, then turned back to the window. Then we end it. They spent the next 2 days fortifying the ranch. Caleb showed Lila how to build firing positions, how to create clear sight lines, how to turn their home into something defensible without making it feel like a fortress. They moved water barrels closer to the house, stocked ammunition, and established escape routes in case the worst happened. The work was grim and methodical, and neither of them spoke more than necessary. On the third morning, Caleb saddled the bay before dawn. Lila found him in the barn, checking the cinch. Where are you going? Town. Need to send a wire. Talk to the sheriff. He didn't look at her. This ends today, one way or another. I'm coming with you. No. His voice was flat. You stay here where it's safe. Safe? Lila crossed her arms. 7 men know I'm here. You think leaving me alone makes me safer? Caleb's jaw tightened. He finished with the saddle and turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her chest constrict. If they see you in town, it's over. No more pretending, no more bluffing. They'll take you right there in the street, and I won't be able to stop them without starting a war that gets innocent people killed. Then what's your plan? Go to the sheriff and hope he cares enough to help? The sheriff's a practical man. He doesn't like bounty hunters operating in his town, stirring up trouble. If I can convince him that Garrett and his men are more dangerous than useful, he'll run them out. Caleb picked up his rifle. It's a long shot, but it's better than waiting here for them to come back with reinforcements. Lila stepped closer, her voice dropping. And if it doesn't work? If the sheriff won't help? Then I handle it myself. The words were cold, final. But I need you here, Lila. Need to know you're somewhere I can find you when this is done. Can you give me that? She wanted to refuse, wanted to argue that she could fight, that she'd earned the right to stand beside him. But the naked plea in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't about capability. It was about something deeper, about him needing to know that if the worst happened, she wouldn't be caught in the crossfire. Be careful, she said finally. Always am. He moved past her toward the barn door, then paused. If I'm not back by nightfall, you take the mare and ride north. There's a rancher named Coleman about 20 miles up the trail. Good man, owes me a favor. Tell him I sent you. He'll get you to safety. Caleb, promise me. Lila's throat closed up. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and watched him swing up into the saddle. He looked down at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then turned the bay toward the trail. She stood in the barn doorway until he disappeared over the rise, then forced herself back to work. The chickens needed feeding. The garden needed watering. The fence line needed checking. She moved through these tasks mechanically, her mind elsewhere, counting the hours until he'd be back. The sun climbed. The heat pressed down. Lila worked until her shirt stuck to her back and her hands ached, then retreated to the house to escape the worst of the afternoon blaze. She cleaned her rifle, checked the loads, positioned herself by the window where she could see the approach. Waiting felt like drowning in slow motion. It was late afternoon when she saw the dust. Not from the north, where Caleb had gone. From the east, where Garrett had come before. Lila's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the door, scanning the horizon. 3 riders, moving fast. Not 7. Not an army. Just 3 men who thought they could take what they wanted from a woman alone. They'd miscalculated. Lila stepped onto the porch, rifle held low, but ready. The riders spotted her and slowed, approaching with the kind of cautious confidence that came from believing they had the upper hand. She recognized 2 of them from the previous confrontation, the short one with dead eyes, and a third man, younger, with a mean smile that didn't reach his eyes. The scarred man, Garrett, wasn't among them. They stopped at the edge of the yard, horses stamping and blowing. "Where's Holt?" the short one called. "Not here." Lila kept her voice steady. "And you're trespassing. Again." "Figured he'd ride out eventually. Left you all alone, did he?" The younger man grinned. "That was stupid of him." "Was it?" Lila raised the rifle, not aiming but making her intent clear. "Because from where I'm standing, you're 3 men on foot facing a woman with a gun who's got nothing left to lose. Seems to me Caleb's not the stupid one." The short man's expression hardened. "You're wanted for murder, girl. You can come with us peaceful, or we can drag you. Either way, you're leaving here today." "I'm not wanted for anything except being alive. The man I killed was trying to sell me like livestock. That's not murder. That's survival." Lila's finger rested against the trigger guard. "And I'm done being taken anywhere I don't want to go." Big talk for someone outnumbered. The younger man started to dismount. Lila shifted her aim, the barrel now pointed squarely at his chest. "Take one more step and find out how big." He froze, 1 foot in the stirrup. The short man cursed and moved his hand toward his gun. Lila swung the rifle toward him, smooth and fast, and saw the calculation in his eyes shift. He'd expected fear, expected hesitation. What he got was a woman who'd already killed once and would do it again if pressed. "You really want to die for $200? Lila asked quietly. "Because that's what's going to happen. Maybe you get me, maybe you don't. But at least one of you is going down before I do, and I'm betting none of you want to be the one." The silence stretched out, taut and trembling. The horses shifted nervously, sensing the tension. The younger man slowly eased his foot out of the stirrup and settled back into the saddle. The short man's hand moved away from his gun, lifting slowly in a gesture that might have been surrender or simply self-preservation. "This isn't over," he said. "It is for today." Lila kept the rifle steady. "Now ride out and tell Garrett that the next time anyone comes onto this land looking for me, they better bring more men and better odds, because I'm not running anymore." For a moment she thought they might push it. Thought the promise of easy money might override their survival instincts. But something in her stance, or her voice, or the absolute certainty in her eyes convinced them. The short man jerked his chin toward the others, and they turned their horses. "You can't hide here forever," he called over his shoulder. "Don't plan to hide, plan to live. There's a difference." She watched them ride away, holding position until they crested the rise and disappeared. Only then did she lower the rifle, her hands beginning to shake with the aftermath of adrenaline. She sank onto the porch steps, gulping air, and forced herself to breathe slowly until her heart stopped trying to hammer out of her chest. She'd done it. Faced them down alone and sent them running. The realization felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. For years she'd been told she was weak, helpless, something to be used and discarded. But she'd just proven otherwise. Proven it to them, and more importantly, proven it to herself. Lila was still sitting there when Caleb rode in an hour later. He took one look at her face and swung down from the bay, his expression tight with concern. "What happened?" "3 of them came. I sent them away." She stood, still gripping the rifle. "They won't be back today." Caleb closed the distance between them in 3 strides, his hands hovering near her shoulders, as if he wanted to touch her, but wasn't sure he should. "Did they hurt you?" "No, I didn't give them the chance." She met his gaze. "I told them I wasn't running anymore. That if they wanted me, they'd have to go through both of us. I think they believed me." Something fierce and proud flashed across Caleb's face. He let out a breath that might have been relief or admiration or both. "Good. That's good." He finally touched her then, just his hand on her arm, brief and grounding. "You did exactly right." "Did the sheriff help?" Caleb's expression darkened. "After a fashion. Sent a deputy to find Garrett, told him his men needed to stop harassing local ranchers, or they'd all be run out of town. Garrett wasn't there. Apparently rode out yesterday toward Austin. But the deputy made it clear the law wasn't on their side. Will that stop them? Probably not, but it buys us time." He glanced toward the horizon where the riders had disappeared. "They know now they can't just waltz in here and take you. That changes things, makes them have to think harder, plan better. And the longer they wait, the more likely they are to give up and move on to easier targets." Lila wanted to believe him, But something in her gut said this wasn't over, that men like Garrett didn't give up just because the odds had shifted. They doubled down, got meaner. And when they came back, they'd come harder than before. "What if they don't move on?" she asked quietly. Caleb was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and certain. "Then we end it, permanently." The weight of those words settled over them. Lila understood what he meant, what he was willing to do, not just defend her, but eliminate the threat entirely. It was a line most people wouldn't cross, a choice that would mark him in ways that couldn't be undone. And he was offering to make it anyway, for her. "I don't want you to have to do that," she said. "I know." Caleb's jaw tightened. "But if it comes down to your life or theirs, there's no choice. Not for me." She reached out, her hand covering his where it still rested on her arm. His skin was warm, calloused, solid. "Thank you. For all of it. For taking me in. For teaching me to stand. For—" her voice caught. "For seeing me as more than just someone to be saved." Caleb turned his hand over, his fingers curling gently around hers. "You were never just something to be saved, Lila. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You just needed someone to give you room to prove it." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them had named. Then Caleb cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking contact. "We should eat. Long day tomorrow." They moved through the evening routine in companionable silence. Caleb cooked while Lila tended the animals, and they ate together on the porch as the sun set in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The air cooled, carrying the scent of sage and juniper. Somewhere in the distance, a nighthawk called. "My father used to say that trouble always finds you right when you think you're safe," Lila said, breaking the quiet. "That peace is just the space between storms." Your father was a pessimist. He was a realist. She pulled her knees to her chest. And he was right. Every time I thought I'd found solid ground, it gave way. Caleb considered this. Maybe, or maybe you just hadn't found the right ground yet. Maybe this is different. How do you know? I don't. He set his plate aside. But I know that running from trouble doesn't make it go away. It just means you face it tired and alone. Standing your ground means you face it on your terms, with people beside you who won't let you fall. People like you. People like me. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the last light of the dying sun. I meant what I said before. This place is better with you in it. I'm better with you in it. So whatever comes, we face it together. That's not negotiable. Lila felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen solid for years. She wanted to tell him that she felt the same, that somewhere in the past weeks this ranch had stopped being refuge and become home, that he'd stopped being a stranger who offered shelter and become someone she couldn't imagine living without. But the words wouldn't come, so she just nodded, hoping he could see in her face what she couldn't say out loud. They sat together as the stars emerged, bright and sharp against the darkening sky. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The silence said everything that mattered. Garrett returned 3 days later, and this time he brought the law. Lila was repairing the chicken coop when she heard the horses. 5 riders this time, moving at a steady pace. She recognized Garrett immediately, the scar, the cold calculation in his eyes. Behind him rode the short man from before, 2 other rough-looking men she didn't recognize, and a 5th man wearing a sheriff's star, her blood turned to ice. She set down her tools and walked toward the house, forcing herself to move calmly, deliberately. Caleb emerged from the barn as the riders entered the yard, and their eyes met across the distance. He gave her a slight shake of his head. Don't run, don't panic, and moved to intercept the group. Sheriff? Caleb's voice was level, respectful. What brings you out here? The sheriff was a lean man in his 50s, weathered and sharp-eyed. He dismounted slowly, his gaze taking in the ranch with practiced assessment. Got a complaint, Holt. These men say you're harboring a fugitive. Woman named Lila Wade, wanted for murder down near the Pedernales. I'm harboring my hired hand, woman named Lila Monroe. She's been working here near 2 months now, and she's not wanted for anything except being good with livestock and handy with a fence line. Garrett urged his horse forward. That's her right there. I'd know her anywhere. She killed a man in cold blood and ran. We're here to bring her in. You're here for the reward money, Caleb corrected coldly. Don't dress it up as justice. The sheriff held up a hand. Let's keep this civil. Miss, what's your name? Lila stepped forward, her chin high. Lila Monroe. You got papers proving that? Do you have papers proving who you are, Sheriff? Her voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her. Most people out here don't carry documentation of their existence. We're just trying to live. Fair point. The sheriff studied her. But these men are saying you killed someone. Man named Dalton Wade. That true? Yes. The admission rippled through the group. Garrett smiled, thin and cruel. Caleb's expression didn't change, but his hand moved fractionally closer to his gun. You confessing to murder? The sheriff asked carefully. I'm confessing to defending myself. Lila met his gaze squarely. Dalton Wade bought me from my father when I was 14 years old. Forced me into a marriage that wasn't legal or binding. Tried to sell me to another man when he got tired of me. When I fought back, he came at me with a knife. I grabbed the nearest weapon and defended myself. That's not murder, Sheriff. That's survival. The sheriff's expression shifted, something uncomfortable crossing his face. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. And if you want proof, ride down to the Pedernales and ask around. Ask about Dalton Wade's business. Ask how many women he moved through there. Ask why no one ever reported him, even though everyone knew what he was doing. Her voice hardened. Or you can take the word of these men who want me dead so they can collect blood money from Wade's brother. Your choice. Garrett's face darkened. She's lying, making up stories to save her own skin. Am I? Lila turned to face him. Then explain why you're here instead of real lawmen. Explain why you're working for Wade's brother instead of the state. Explain why you've been threatening and harassing a rancher on his own land instead of going through proper legal channels. Enough. The sheriff's voice cut through the rising tension. He looked at Garrett. Is there an actual warrant out for this woman? Garrett hesitated, just a fraction too long. Wade's brother filed a complaint. That's not what I asked. Is there a warrant signed by a judge, issued by a court? The law moves slow out here. We're acting on behalf of the family. So that's a no. The sheriff's expression hardened. Which means you boys are operating as bounty hunters without legal authority. And bounty hunting's illegal in this county without proper documentation. He turned to Caleb. This woman under your employment? She is. She caused you any trouble? None. She's been nothing but honest and hardworking since she arrived. The sheriff nodded slowly, his gaze moving between Lila and Garrett. Then, here's how this is going to go. You boys are going to ride out of here and leave these people alone. If the Wade family wants justice, they can file proper charges and let the courts handle it. But you don't get to terrorize citizens on my watch. Clear? She killed a man. Garrett's voice rose. You can't just let her walk free. I can and I am until someone shows me legal cause to do otherwise. Now mount up and ride out, or I'll arrest you for harassment, trespassing, and threatening behavior. The sheriff's hand rested on his gun. Don't test me on this. For a long, dangerous moment, Garrett looked like he might argue. His hand twitched toward his weapon. The other men shifted in their saddles, uncertain. Then the sheriff's deputy, who'd been silent until now, moved his horse to flank his boss, his own gun visible and ready. Garrett's jaw worked. He stared at Lila with such naked hatred that she almost flinched. This isn't over. Yes, it is. The sheriff's voice was flat. You come back to this county, you get arrested. You bother these people again, you get arrested. You even think about collecting any kind of bounty without proper legal authority, you get arrested. We clear? Garrett didn't answer. He wheeled his horse and spurred it hard, riding out at a gallop. The other men followed, casting backward glances, but not willing to defy the sheriff's direct order. When they disappeared over the rise, the sheriff let out a long breath. He looked at Lila, his expression serious but not unkind. I can't promise they won't try again. Men like that don't give up easy, especially when there's money involved. I understand. But I can tell you this, if they come back, you defend yourself however you need to, and if it comes to shooting, make sure you can prove they drew first. He glanced at Caleb. That goes for both of you. I don't like violence, but I like injustice even less. Appreciate you coming out, Sheriff, Caleb said quietly. Didn't do it for you. Did it because the law means something, and I won't have bounty hunters operating outside it. He remounted his horse. You two be careful. And Miss Monroe, if you ever want to file charges against the Wade family for what they did to you, you come see me. I'll make sure it gets heard. Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. The sheriff tipped his hat and rode out with his deputy, leaving her and Caleb alone in the sudden quiet. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Lila's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the porch steps, her whole body shaking. Caleb was beside her in an instant, his hand on her back, steady and grounding. You did good, he said quietly. You told the truth and you didn't back down. That took courage. I thought he was going to arrest me. Her voice came out thin. Thought it was over. It's not over. Not yet. Caleb's hand moved in slow circles. But we bought time, and we got the law on our side, at least for now. That's more than we had before. Lila leaned into him, too exhausted to maintain distance or propriety. He was warm and solid, and for just a moment she let herself believe they might actually survive this, that they might actually have a future that wasn't defined by running and fear. Garrett's not going to stop, she said. I know. He'll come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but he'll come back, and next time he won't bring the sheriff. He'll bring men who don't care about the law. Let him come. Caleb's voice was hard as iron. This is my land. You're under my protection, and anyone who tries to take you will have to kill me first. That's a promise. Lila turned to look at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Not just determination or stubbornness, but something deeper, something that looked dangerously like devotion. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask the question that had been building in her chest for weeks now, but he shook his head slightly. Not yet, he said quietly. When this is done. When you're safe, and we can think about something other than survival. Then we'll talk about everything else. She understood. Whatever was growing between them, this fragile, precious thing that neither of them had named, it needed to wait until the threat had passed, until they could look at each other without the shadow of violence hanging over them. So she nodded and stood, and they went back to work. Because work was what kept them alive, what kept them sane, what kept them moving forward when everything else wanted to drag them back into darkness. And because in the end, all they had was each other and this land and the stubborn refusal to let fear win. The attack came 6 days later, in the hour before dawn when the world hung suspended between darkness and light. Lila woke to the sound of breaking glass and Caleb's voice cutting through the dark, sharp and urgent. Get down! She rolled off the bed as the first gunshot shattered the morning quiet. Wood splintered above her head. She grabbed her rifle from where it leaned against the wall and crawled toward the bedroom door, her heart slamming against her ribs. Through the opening, she could see Caleb crouched by the window, returning fire in controlled bursts. How many? She called. 4 that I can see, maybe more. Another shot whistled past him. They're using the barn for cover. Lila moved to the opposite window, staying low, and peered through the shutters. The barn was barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom, but she could make out shadows moving, muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers. They'd planned this, waited until the darkest hour when aim was hardest and confusion easiest. She fired twice toward the largest shadow, heard a curse and the thud of someone hitting dirt. Caleb glanced at her, his face grim in the lamplight. Bedroom window, cover the south approach. She didn't argue, just moved back into the bedroom and positioned herself where she could watch the corral and the trail beyond. Her hands were steady now, the initial shock burned away by something colder and more focused. This was survival stripped to its essence. Them or us, live or die. And she'd already made her choice weeks ago when she decided to stop running. The firefight settled into a rhythm. Shoot, reload, wait for return fire, shoot again. The men outside were trying to pin them down, keep them from moving, maybe hoping exhaustion or ammunition would fail first. But Caleb had prepared for this. They had water, food, plenty of cartridges, and the advantage of defensive positions. They're trying to circle around, Lila shouted as she caught movement near the chicken coop. She fired, missed, fired again. This time the shadow fell and didn't rise. Good shot. Caleb's voice was tight with concentration. Watch for fire. They might try to smoke us out. The thought had barely formed when she smelled it. Kerosene. Her stomach dropped. She leaned out just enough to see one of the men pouring liquid along the barn's base, another holding a torch. "Caleb, the barn!" He saw it the same moment she did. His rifle cracked once, twice, and the man with the torch dropped. But the kerosene was already pooled, already spreading, and flames erupted with a hungry roar that lit the yard like daylight. "Damn it!" Caleb moved to her side, both of them watching the barn burn. The horses inside screamed, panicked. "We have to get them out. They'll cut you down the second you step outside." "Can't let the animals burn." His jaw was set, that stubborn determination she'd come to recognize as immovable. "Cover me. I'm going for the barn door." Caleb, but he was already moving, rifle in one hand, running low and fast across the open ground. Lila positioned herself at the window and fired steadily at anything that moved, forcing the attackers to keep their heads down. Caleb reached the barn and wrenched the door open, disappeared inside. Seconds crawled by like hours. Then the bay burst out, eyes rolling white, followed by the mare and the two workhorses, all of them bolting for the open pasture. Caleb emerged last, coughing from the smoke. He was halfway back to the house when a shot caught him. Lila saw him stagger, saw the red bloom spread across his shoulder, and something in her chest turned to ice and then to fire. She stood fully in the window, exposed and furious, and emptied her rifle at the shooter's position. Wood exploded. Someone cried out. She didn't care if they were hit or just scared. She dropped the empty rifle, grabbed Caleb's spare from the wall, and kept firing until he reached the porch and dragged himself inside. Blood soaked his shirt, dripping onto the floor. His face had gone pale, but his eyes were clear, focused. "I'm all right. Just grazed me." "That's more than a graze." Lila slammed the door and threw the bolt, then pulled him away from the window. "Sit. Let me see it." "No time. They're regrouping. Sit down, Caleb, or I swear I'll shoot you myself." Her voice cracked on the words, fear and fury tangled together. He must have heard something in her tone because he sank into the chair without further argument. She tore his shirt away from the wound. The bullet had carved a deep furrow across his upper shoulder, missing bone but tearing muscle. Blood welled steadily. She grabbed a clean cloth and pressed it hard against the injury. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "Can you move your arm?" He tested it carefully, grimacing. "Yeah, hurts like hell, but it works." "You're lucky it didn't hit the joint." She bound the wound tightly with strips torn from her spare shirt, working quickly. Outside, the barn's flames had spread to the hay storage, sending up a pillar of smoke that would be visible for miles. "They'll see that fire in town. Someone might come. Or more of them might come." Caleb pushed himself upright, steadying himself against the table. "We need to end this now, before they can bring reinforcements." "How? There's at least 3 of them left, maybe 4. We're pinned down in here." Caleb's gaze moved to the back window, calculating. "The root cellar. Opens to the west side, behind the garden. They won't be watching it." "You want to flank them?" "I want to make them choose between dying and leaving. Sometimes that's the only language men like this understand." He picked up his rifle one-handed, testing his grip. "You stay here. Keep them occupied. I'll come around from behind. You're bleeding. You can barely hold that rifle. I can hold it well enough to do what needs doing." His voice softened fractionally. "I need you here, Lila. Need you safe. Can you trust me on this?" She wanted to say no, wanted to lock him in the bedroom and defend them both from right here where she could see him, protect him. But the look in his eyes told her this was the only way, and that he'd go whether she agreed or not. "If you get yourself killed, I'm never forgiving you." The corner of his mouth twitched despite everything. Noted. He moved to the root cellar entrance in the pantry, descended into darkness, and was gone. Lila positioned herself at the front window and started firing in controlled bursts, making noise, making sure the men outside stayed focused on the house. Minutes dragged past. The barn collapsed in on itself with a shriek of tortured wood and a shower of sparks. The sky began to lighten, gray dawn bleeding into the smoke-filled air. Then she heard it, gunfire from the west side, Caleb's rifle distinctive and measured, shouts of surprise and alarm. She leaned out and saw 2 men break cover, running for their horses. She dropped one with a shot to the leg. The other made it to his mount, but Caleb's next shot took the horse down and the rider went sprawling. Movement near the well caught her eye. A 4th man, bigger than the others, rising with his gun aimed at Caleb's back. Lila didn't think. She brought her rifle up and fired in one smooth motion. The man spun and fell, his shot going wild into the dirt. Silence crashed down, broken only by the crackle of flames and the moaning of wounded men. Lila's ears rang, her hands shook. She forced herself to breathe, to count. One man dead by the well, one with a leg wound by the horses, one pinned under his mount, one unaccounted for. Caleb? Her voice sounded distant, muffled. Here. He emerged from behind the garden, moving stiffly, his makeshift bandage already soaked through with fresh blood. 3 down. The last one ran, probably halfway to the county line by now. Lila descended from the porch on legs that barely held her. She crossed to him, and he caught her with his good arm, pulled her close. They stood there in the smoke and ruin, holding each other while the sun rose on the wreckage of their stand. It's done, he said quietly. They came for you and they failed. Word of that spreads, no one else will try. You're hurt. I'll heal. He pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes searching. You saved my life just now. That shot by the well, you've saved mine more times than I can count. We're even. He shook his head slowly. We're partners. That's different from even. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Partners. Not savior and saved, not protector and protected. Equals who stood together and fought together and survived together. The wounded man by the horses groaned. Caleb straightened, his expression hardening. We need to deal with them. Get them patched up enough to ride out, then send them on their way with a message. They spent the next hour doing exactly that. The man with the leg wound was young, maybe 19, and scared enough to talk. His name was Miller. Garrett had hired him and 6 others with promises of easy money. The man under the horse had a broken collarbone but would live. The one Lila had shot by the well was dead, and no one seemed to mourn him much. Caleb bound their wounds with rough efficiency, gave them water, and stood over them with his rifle while they saddled their remaining horses. You go back and you tell Garrett something, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Tell him Lila Monroe is under my protection, and this is my land. Tell him the next man who comes here dies. No warnings, no mercy. Tell him the law knows what he's doing and won't protect him. And tell him that if I ever see his face again, I'll put a bullet in it. We clear? Miller nodded frantically. We're clear. We're done. I swear we're done. Good. Caleb lowered the rifle. Now ride out and don't come back. They went, the wounded man draped across his saddle, Miller leading both horses. Lila and Caleb watched them disappear into the morning haze, then turned to survey the damage. The barn was gone, reduced to charred beams and ash. The chicken coop had taken stray shots but could be repaired. The house bore scars, broken windows, splintered wood, bullet holes that would need patching. But it stood. They'd held it. We need to get you to town, Lila said, eyeing Caleb's shoulder. That wound needs proper doctoring. Later. First we recover the horses, make sure nothing else is burning, secure the property. He swayed slightly, caught himself. Then town. Caleb, I'm fine. You're bleeding through your bandage and you can barely stand. We're going to town. Now. She stepped close, her voice firm. You don't get to be stubborn about this. You took care of me when I showed up half dead on your porch. Now I'm taking care of you. Something shifted in his expression, the hard edges softening. Yes, ma'am. They saddled the mare. She'd come back when the shooting stopped, skittish but unharmed, and rode into town together. Caleb swayed in the saddle but stayed upright through sheer willpower. The doctor took one look at him and ordered him onto the examination table, tisking over the makeshift bandage and the infection already setting in. You should have come hours ago, the doctor muttered, cleaning the wound. Lucky the bullet didn't hit anything vital. You'll need to keep this clean and wrapped for at least 2 weeks. No heavy lifting, no working the ranch. 2 weeks is impossible, Caleb said. Then you'll lose the arm to infection and it'll be permanent. Your choice. The doctor began stitching, his movements practiced and sure. What happened out there? We saw the smoke. Bounty hunters. Lila spoke from where she stood by the door. Came onto our land without permission. We defended ourselves. The doctor's hands paused. There a body? One. The others rode out. She met his gaze steadily. They drew first. They burned our barn. We had no choice. He absorbed this, then went back to his work. Sheriff's going to want to hear about it. I imagine he will. The doctor finished stitching and wrapped Caleb's shoulder in clean bandages. Come back in 3 days so I can check for infection. And I mean it about the heavy work. You tear these stitches, you'll be in real trouble. They found the sheriff at his office, and Lila told the whole story while Caleb sat quiet and pale in the corner chair. The sheriff listened, asked pointed questions, and finally nodded. You'll need to show me the body, file a report. But from what you're telling me, sounds like clear self-defense, especially after I warned those men to leave you alone. He leaned back. Garrett? Wasn't there? Send his men to do the dirty work. Coward. The sheriff spat into a brass spittoon. I'll put out word that he's wanted for questioning. If he's smart, he'll have already left the territory. And if he's not smart? Lila asked. Then he'll hang for murder, attempted murder, arson, and about 6 other charges I can think of off the top of my head. The sheriff's expression was grim. You two did right by defending yourselves. But I'd suggest you stay alert for a while yet. Men like Garrett don't always think straight when their pride's been damaged. They rode back to the ranch in silence, exhaustion settling over them like a heavy blanket. The ruins of the barn looked even worse in the afternoon light, a black scar against the land. But the house stood whole, and the animals had returned to graze in the pasture, and that felt like victory enough. Lila helped Caleb down from the mare and into the house. He sank onto his bed with a grimace, and she knelt to remove his boots. I can do that, he protested weakly. Hush. She pulled the boots off, set them aside, then fetched water and a clean cloth. You've been taking care of me for months. Let me return the favor. He watched her through half-lidded eyes, too tired to argue. She cleaned the dust and smoke from his face, helped him drink, adjusted the pillows behind his back. His good hand caught hers as she turned to leave. Stay. His voice was rough. Just for a minute. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, her hand still in his. The room was dim, quiet, peaceful in a way that felt stolen after the violence of the morning. She studied his face, the lines that had deepened with pain, the gray in his hair that caught the fading light, the steadiness in his eyes even now. I thought I was going to lose you, she said quietly, when I saw you go down. But you didn't. I'm here. We both are. His thumb moved across her knuckles, gentle. We survived, Lila, together. I'm tired of just surviving. I know. He was quiet for a moment. When this is truly done, when we know for certain we're safe, what do you want? For yourself? For your life? She'd been asked that question before by men who wanted her to say she wanted them, wanted whatever they were offering, but Caleb's tone held no expectation, no demand, just genuine curiosity about what she dreamed of when she let herself dream. I want this, she said finally. This ranch, this work, this life. I want to wake up knowing I'm building something that lasts. I want to look at land I've tended and feel proud of what I've made. I want... She paused, gathering courage. I want to be somewhere I'm not afraid. Somewhere I belong. You belong here. His hand tightened on hers. You've belonged here since the first day you chose to stay instead of run. This is your home as much as mine. More, maybe, because you fought for it. So did you. For you, I fought for you. The admission hung in the air, stark and honest. I told myself it was about doing the right thing, about protecting someone who needed protecting. But that's not the whole truth. I fought because I can't imagine this place without you anymore. Can't imagine my life without you in it. Lila's throat closed. She looked down at their joined hands, his calloused and strong, hers small but no less capable. Two people who'd been broken by their pasts, who'd found each other by accident, who'd built something real and solid from nothing but determination and trust. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to be with someone without it being a transaction. How to let someone close without waiting for the trap to spring. Neither do I. Caleb's voice was soft. But I figure we learn together. Take it slow, let it grow natural. Don't force anything that isn't ready. And if it doesn't work, if you decide you want something different, I'll still be here. Still be your partner, still stand beside you. Nothing changes that. She met his eyes then and saw the truth there. No pressure, no demands, just an offer of something she'd never had before. A relationship built on choice and respect and the freedom to walk away if she needed to. I'd like to try, she said. When you're healed and the danger's past and we've got time to breathe, I'd like to see what this could be. Then we'll try. He smiled, tired but genuine. Now let me rest before I say something even more foolish. She stood, squeezed his hand once more, and left him to sleep. Outside the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The burned barn stood as testament to what they'd endured. But the land stretched out beyond it, green and growing, full of possibility. Lila walked to the garden and knelt in the dirt, her hands finding work in the familiar rhythm of weeding and tending. The earth smelled rich and clean. Somewhere in the distance, the horses grazed. A hawk called overhead, hunting the twilight. She'd run so far and so long, always believing that safety was something other people had, something she could never claim for herself. But maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe safety wasn't a place you found. Maybe it was something you built with your own hands, defended with your own strength, and shared with someone who saw you as you were and chose to stand beside you anyway. 3 weeks later, after Caleb's shoulder had healed enough to work and the burned barn had been cleared away and no sign of Garrett or his men had surfaced, they rode into town together. "Where are we going?" Lila asked as Caleb guided them past the general store toward the far end of the main street. "You'll see." They stopped at a small office with a sign that read County Clerk. Caleb dismounted and held out his hand to help her down. "Come on." Inside, a balding man looked up from his ledgers and smiled. "Mr. Holt, Miss Monroe, what can I do for you?" Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Need to file proof of identity and residence for Miss Monroe. She's been working my ranch, and I want it official that she's employed there legally." The clerk unfolded the paper, scanned it, then looked at Lila. "This says Lila Monroe, age 21, residence at the Holt Ranch. That accurate?" "Yes, sir." "And you're signing as her employer?" The clerk directed this at Caleb. "I am. And as character witness, she's a hard worker, honest, reliable. Anyone questions her identity or her right to be here, they answer to me." The clerk stamped the document and filed it in his cabinet. "All set. Anything else?" Caleb glanced at Lila, something unreadable in his expression. "Marriage licenses. How do those work?" The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You planning to get married?" "Thinking about it." "Well, you'd need to file for a license, wait 3 days, then have a ceremony with witnesses. Or," he pulled out a blank form, "you can file a declaration of informal marriage. Sign it, I record it, and you're legally wed without ceremony. Common out here where preachers are scarce." Caleb took the form and studied it. Then he handed it to Lila. "Your choice. We can file this now, we can wait, or we cannot do it at all. No wrong answer." Lila stared at the paper, her heart hammering. This wasn't a proposal, not in the traditional sense. It was an offer of partnership formalized, of protection made legal, of two people choosing to bind their lives together without romance or pressure or expectation beyond what they'd already built. "If we do this," she said carefully, "it's because we want to, not because we have to. Not because you're trying to protect me or I owe you something." "Agreed." Caleb's voice was steady. "It's a choice, one we both make freely." She looked at him. This man who'd given her shelter and safety and the space to become someone she'd never thought she could be. Who'd fought for her, bled for her, stood beside her when the world wanted to break her. Who'd never asked for more than she could give and never offered less than everything he had. "I choose this," she said quietly. "I choose you. I choose us." Something bright and fierce flashed across Caleb's face. He took the pen from the clerk, signed his name in careful script, then handed it to Lila. She signed beside him, her hand steady, her heart full of something that felt dangerously like hope. The clerk witnessed their signatures, stamped the document, and filed it away. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Holt. May you have a long and happy life together. They walked out into the afternoon sunlight, legally bound but feeling exactly the same as they had walking in. Caleb helped her onto the mare, then swung up onto the bay. They rode side by side back toward the ranch, the land familiar and welcoming beneath the wide Texas sky. "We should plant something," Lila said as they crested the rise and their home came into view. "Something that'll take years to grow. An orchard, maybe, or shade trees." "Why's that?" "Because I want to be here to see them grow. Want to know we're not going anywhere." She glanced at him. "Want proof that we're building something that lasts." Caleb smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "An orchard it is. We'll plant in the spring." They rode into the yard together, dismounted together, tended the horses together. Everything they did now carried the weight of permanence, of commitment freely given and joyfully accepted. The ranch was theirs. The life was theirs. The future was theirs to build. And for the first time since she was a child, Lila felt like she'd come home. The winter came gentle that year, bringing cool rains instead of bitter cold, and with it came the kind of peace that settles deep into bone and blood. Lila woke each morning to find Caleb already up, coffee brewing, the day's work laid out in his mind like a map he was eager to walk. They moved through their routines with the easy synchronicity of people who'd learned each other's rhythms, who knew without asking when to speak and when silence was enough. The new barn rose slowly through November and December, built with lumber they hauled from town and timber they cut from their own land. Caleb worked despite the lingering stiffness in his shoulder, and Lila matched him board for board, her hands growing stronger with each nail-driven home. Neighbors came to help. Word had spread about the attack, about how they'd stood their ground, and there was respect in that. Men who'd never spoken to Caleb before showed up with tools and willing backs, and women brought food and stayed to visit with Lila, asking her advice about gardens and livestock, as if she'd always belonged here. She had, she realized. She just hadn't known it until now. By the time the barn stood complete, sturdy and square with a fresh coat of whitewash, Christmas had come and gone. They'd celebrated quietly, just the two of them, with a venison roast and dried apple pie and the gift of a new rifle Caleb had ordered special from Austin. Lila had carved him a pipe from cherry wood, spending weeks getting the grain right, the bowl smooth. He'd smoked it that evening on the porch, and the look on his face had been worth every hour of work. January arrived with news that made Lila's hand still over the bread dough she was kneading. The sheriff rode out himself to deliver it, his expression grim but satisfied. "Garrett's dead," he said without preamble. "Got himself shot trying to rob a ranch up near Waco. Owner didn't miss, and Garrett didn't get up." He paused. "His men scattered after that. Word is they left the territory entirely. Figured without him pushing them, the money wasn't worth the trouble." Lila looked at Caleb, saw her own relief mirrored in his eyes. "It's really over?" "It's over." The sheriff shifted his weight. "There's no warrant for you, Mrs. Holt, I should say. Never was, truth be told. Wade's brother tried to stir up charges but couldn't get a judge to sign off. Turns out Dalton Wade's got a record longer than my arm, and no one was inclined to mourn him." He tipped his hat. "You're free and clear, both of you." After he left, Lila stood in the yard staring out at the land that had become hers, the hills rolling away to the horizon, the creek cutting silver through the winter-brown grass, the trees she and Caleb had marked for their future orchard. Free and clear. The words echoed in her mind, strange and wonderful and almost impossible to believe. "You all right?" Caleb's voice was soft behind her. "I don't know what I am." She turned to face him. "I spent so long running, so long afraid, that I don't know what to do with this. With safety. With the knowledge that no one's coming for me anymore." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "You live. You build. You let yourself be happy." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You let yourself have the life you've been fighting for." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He smiled, and there was something in it that made her chest tighten. "Though I've got a thought about where we start." That's how they found themselves 2 weeks later at the base of the South pasture, digging holes in earth that was still half frozen but yielding under their determination. They'd ordered 20 apple saplings, 5 pear, 3 cherry, and 2 pecan. The trees arrived bare root and dormant, ready to sleep through the rest of winter before waking to spring. Caleb showed her how to measure the spacing, how to dig wide and deep, how to spread the roots so they'd take hold proper. They worked side by side through the short winter days, planting each tree with care and purpose. Lila's back ached and her hands blistered despite the gloves, but she welcomed the pain. It was the good kind, the kind that came from building something that would outlast her, that would feed people she'd never meet, that would stand as proof that she'd been here and mattered. On the day they planted the last tree, a pecan sapling that would take 10 years or more to bear, Caleb pulled something from his pocket. It was wrapped in cloth, small and heavy. He handed it to Lila without ceremony. She unwrapped it to find a ring. Not fancy, just a simple band of silver with a pattern etched around it that looked like leaves and vines intertwined. She looked up at him, questions in her eyes. "Commissioned it from the silversmith in town," he said. "Figured if we're doing this proper, you should have something that marks it, something that's yours." He paused. "The pattern's apple blossoms, for the orchard, for what we're building together." Lila's vision blurred. She'd never had jewelry before, never owned anything that was purely for beauty or sentiment. She slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, and held her hand up to catch the light. "It's beautiful. So are you." Caleb's voice was rough with something that might have been emotion. "Never thought I'd have this, Lila. Never thought I'd have someone to build with, to plan with. Never thought I'd be standing in a field planting trees for a future I can actually see." He cleared his throat. "You gave me that. Gave me hope again." She moved into his arms then, and he held her close, his chin resting on top of her head. Around them, the saplings stood naked against the winter sky, waiting for spring, waiting to grow. Just like them. Spring came with wildflowers carpeting the hills and the creek running high with snowmelt from the distant mountains. The orchard trees leafed out, tentative green pushing through bare branches. Lila spent her mornings in the garden, coaxing vegetables from the rich soil, and her afternoons working cattle with Caleb. They'd expanded the herd, bought 3 more horses, and started raising pigs. The ranch was thriving in ways that felt almost miraculous after the hardship and violence of the previous year. One afternoon in late April, Lila was weeding the garden when she felt it, a wave of dizziness that made her sit back on her heels, breathing carefully until it passed. It had been happening for a week now, these sudden spells that left her unsteady and strange. At first she'd blamed the heat, or maybe something she'd eaten, but as the days passed and other signs appeared, the truth became unavoidable. She waited until evening to tell Caleb. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. The words stuck in her throat twice before she finally forced them out. "I think I'm pregnant." His arm tightened around her. For a long moment he didn't speak, and fear crept in. What if he didn't want this? What if it changed things? What if... "You think or you know?" His voice was careful, controlled. "Pretty sure. All the signs are there. I've been sick in the mornings, dizzy, tired, and I'm late." She pulled back to look at him. "I know we never talked about this. No, it wasn't planned. If you don't want... Don't want?" He looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "Lila, I want everything with you. Children, grandchildren, a life so full and rich we can't hold it all. This..." He placed his hand gently over her still flat stomach. "This is the best news you could have given me." The fear dissolved, replaced by something warm and overwhelming. "You mean that?" "I mean it." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We're going to be parents. We're going to raise a child on this land, teach them everything we know, watch them grow. You and me, together." He pulled her close again. "Nothing could make me happier." They sat there as the stars came out, talking in low voices about names and nurseries and all the changes a baby would bring. Caleb's hand stayed on her stomach as if he could already feel the life growing there. And maybe he could, Lila thought. Maybe love made you sensitive to miracles. The pregnancy progressed through summer with manageable discomfort and occasional wonder. Lila worked as long as her body allowed, only grudgingly accepting Caleb's insistence that she not lift heavy loads or work herself to exhaustion. The women from neighboring ranches started visiting more often, bringing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and the kind of practical support that made Lila realize she'd found community here. She had friends. She had people who cared whether she and her child thrived. In August, they rode into town for supplies and found themselves at the general store when a stranger approached. He was young, well-dressed, with the look of someone from back east trying to blend in and failing. He tipped his hat to them both. "Pardon me, but are you Caleb and Lila Holt?" Caleb's hand moved fractionally closer to his gun. "We are. What's it to you?" "My name's Porter. I'm a lawyer from Austin." He reached into his jacket slowly, producing a document. "I've been trying to track you down for 3 months. It's about Dalton Wade's estate." Lila's blood ran cold. "I don't want anything from him." "I understand, ma'am, but you're entitled to it regardless. When Wade died, his assets went to his wife. That's you, legally, even though the marriage was coerced. His brother contested, but the court ruled in your favor." He held out the document. "It's not much. About $800, a few parcels of land he owned free and clear. But it's yours if you want it. $800. Land. Things that represented security, opportunity, freedom. But they also represented Dalton and everything he'd done to her." Lila looked at Caleb, uncertain. "Your choice," he said quietly. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." She took the document and read through it carefully. The land was near the Pedernales, 300 acres that backed up to river bottom. Good grazing land. The money was held in a bank in Austin, waiting for her signature. None of it was tainted by Dalton's crimes. He'd inherited it from his mother, apparently. It was clean, legal, and completely hers to claim or refuse. "If I take it," she said slowly, "I want to do something good with it. Something that makes up for what he did." Porter nodded. "That's certainly your right, ma'am." She thought about all the women like her, trapped in situations they couldn't escape, with nowhere to run and no one to help. She thought about what a safe place might have meant to her 5 years ago, or 3, or even 1. She thought about the future and what kind of world she wanted her child to grow up in. "I'll take it," she said, "the land and the money. But I want to use it to start something, a place where women can go when they need help, when they're running from bad situations and need somewhere safe to land." She looked at Caleb. "Like what you gave me." His expression softened with pride. "That's a fine thing to do." They worked out the details with Porter over the next hour. The land would be held in trust, managed by a group of local women who understood the need. The money would fund the initial building and operation. Lila would oversee it when she could, but it would run independently, a resource for anyone who needed it. They'd call it Monroe House, after her mother's maiden name, after the woman who tried her best to raise Lila right before death took her too soon. By the time they left town, Lila felt lighter than she had in months. She'd taken the worst thing in her past and transformed it into something that could save others. She'd turned pain into purpose. "You're remarkable," Caleb said as they rode home. "You know that? I'm just doing what should be done." Most people wouldn't. Most people would take the money and run, or refuse it out of pride. "You're thinking about others, about making the world better." He reached over and took her hand. "Our child's lucky to have you as a mother. They're lucky to have you as a father. Then they're lucky all around." He grinned. "Think they'll be stubborn like you or stubborn like me?" "Probably both. We're going to have our hands full." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the hills toward home. The baby came in late October, after a labor that lasted from dawn until well past dark. The doctor stayed throughout, and 2 of the neighbor women came to help, but it was Caleb who held Lila's hand through the worst of it, who whispered encouragement when she was sure she couldn't go on, who caught their daughter as she entered the world squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect. "A girl," he said, his voice breaking. "Lila, we have a daughter." He placed the baby on Lila's chest, and she looked down at the tiny face, eyes squeezed shut, mouth working, impossibly small fingers curling and uncurling. Love crashed through her, so fierce and overwhelming she couldn't breathe for a moment. This was her child, her daughter, a person who would never know what it meant to be sold or traded or treated as property, who would grow up free and loved and safe. "What should we name her?" Caleb asked softly. Lila had thought about this for months, running through possibilities, but now only one name felt right. Hope, because that's what she is, what this whole life is. Hope made real. Hope Holt. Caleb tested the name, then smiled. It's perfect. She's perfect. He kissed Lila's forehead. You're perfect. Both of you. They sat together in the lamplight, the three of them, and let the world shrink down to just this moment. Outside, the ranch waited, the animals needing tending, the work never ending, but for now there was only this: new life, new beginning. Everything they'd fought for made flesh. The seasons turned. Hope grew from infant to baby to toddler, always exploring, always curious, always laughing. She took her first steps in the orchard, between rows of trees that were finally bearing fruit. She learned to ride before she could read, perched in front of Caleb on the bay while he taught her about the land, about the animals, about being part of something bigger than yourself. Monroe House opened in the spring after Hope's first birthday, a solid building on good land with room for 6 women and their children. Within a month, every bed was full. Women came from all over, some fleeing violence, some escaping servitude, some just needing a place to stand while they figured out their next move. Lila visited when she could, brought supplies, offered advice, but mostly she let the women who ran it do their work, trusting them to carry forward what she'd started. The ranch thrived. They added more cattle, more horses, built a second barn, expanded the garden until it fed them year-round with plenty to trade. Caleb taught Lila to carve, and she discovered she had a talent for it, small animals and birds that she sold in town for extra money. She taught him to read music, something her mother had shown her long ago, and they bought a fiddle so he could play in the evenings while she sang. Life settled into a rhythm that felt earned, hard-won, and precious because of it. One evening in late summer, 5 years after Lila had first stumbled onto Caleb's porch bleeding and terrified, they stood together in the orchard watching Hope play. She was chasing fireflies, her delighted laughter carrying through the warm air. The trees around them hung heavy with fruit, apples and pears ready for harvest, the promise of pecans to come in the fall. You remember the day we planted these? Caleb asked. Every detail. Lila leaned against him. I remember thinking they'd never grow, that we were foolish to plan that far ahead when everything felt so uncertain. But they did grow, and so did we. He turned to look at her. I love you, Lila. Don't think I've ever said it plain like that, but I do. Love you more than I thought I could love anything. You made my life mean something again. She reached up and touched his face, traced the lines that had deepened with time and hard work and happiness. I love you too. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved, gave me a home, a purpose, a family, gave me myself back. We saved each other. We did. Hope ran over, breathless and grass-stained, holding up her cupped hands. Mama, look, I caught one. Lila knelt beside her daughter and peered into her hands. A firefly glowed there, pulsing gentle light. Beautiful. Now let it go so it can find its friends. Hope opened her hands and the firefly rose, joining the dozens of others dancing through the orchard. She watched it go, then threw her arms around Lila's neck. Can we have pie tomorrow from our apples? We can. You can help me make it. And can Papa tell a story tonight about the ranch? Caleb scooped Hope up onto his shoulders. I can do that. What kind of story? About how you and Mama met. My favorite. Lila and Caleb exchanged a look over their daughter's head, a look that held everything they'd been through, everything they'd survived, everything they'd built together. The story of how they met was one of violence and fear and desperation, but it was also one of choice and trust and two people deciding to stand together when the world tried to tear them apart. Once upon a time, Caleb began as they walked back toward the house, there was a woman who was brave enough to choose life even when it seemed impossible. Hope listened, rapt, though she'd heard the story dozens of times, and Lila walked beside them, her hand in Caleb's, and felt the weight of absolute contentment. This was what she'd been running toward all those years ago, even if she hadn't known it. This life, this love, this family. They reached the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The land stretched out around them, their land, worked by their hands, sustained by their labor, filled with their dreams. Tomorrow they'd harvest apples. Next week they'd start preparing for winter. Next month, next year, next decade. They'd face it all together. The past was buried in the orchard, beneath trees that bore fruit and provided shade. The present was full and rich and real. And the future? The future was Hope, laughing as her father tickled her. The future was Lila's hand on her stomach where a second child was just beginning to grow. The future was every sunrise that found them still here, still standing, still choosing each other day after day after day. Lila looked at her family, at her home, at the life she'd built from nothing but determination and trust and love, and finally understood what it meant to be free. Not free from pain or struggle or hardship, those would always come, but free to choose how to face them, free to build something beautiful from the wreckage, free to love without fear, to hope without reservation, to live fully and fiercely and on her own terms. She'd run into the dark 5 years ago with nothing but terror driving her forward, but she'd found light, found home, found herself, and she was never running again. Inside, Caleb settled Hope at the table with milk and cornbread while Lila lit the lamps. The house glowed warm and welcoming as night fell. Through the window, the orchard stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, a testament to faith in the future, to belief that good things could grow from pain. "Tell the story again, Papa," Hope demanded around a mouthful of cornbread. "Tell about the fire and the bad men and how you saved Mama." "I didn't save your Mama," Caleb said, pulling Lila close. "She saved herself. I just gave her space to do it." "And then you saved each other," Hope said with the certainty of a child who'd heard this story enough to know it by heart. "That's right, little one. We saved each other." Lila rested her head on Caleb's shoulder and closed her eyes, listening to him tell their daughter about the night they met, about the choices they made, about the life they built. His voice was steady and warm, full of love, and she let it wash over her like a benediction. They'd survived everything the world threw at them. They'd fought for each other, stood together, refused to break. And now they had this: a family, a home, a future that stretched out bright and unwritten before them. The ranch would pass to their children and their children's children. The orchard would grow old and be replaced by new trees planted by new hands. Monroe House would help women for generations to come. Their story would be told and retold until it became part of the land itself, woven into the hills and valleys they'd claimed as their own. But tonight, in this moment, they were simply three people sitting together in a warm kitchen, safe and loved and whole. And that was everything. That was more than everything. It was enough.